Hello everyone, welcome to BCTV, presented to you by Latukan. As it's a regular feature, I'm sure most of you must be aware regarding the kind of shows and events that we do today, right? Today, so I'll be taking a place and helping moderating this show for today. And we have some amazing panelists. We have a VC in Devang and an experienced who can kind of give us a lot of insight into how it kind of goes, right? So I would like to have Devang and Jampal introduce themselves, follow up with my introduction at the end of it. So Devang, would you like to start first?
Sure. Nice to be here, Harsh. Nice to meet everyone. I am Devang Mehta. I'm a partner at Antil Ventures. We're a speed scaling ecosystem. We invest and scale early stage companies in three verticals: healthcare, media tech, and consumer tech. I lead up the health tech business, where we work in conjunction with HCG, India's biggest oncology chain, in scaling startups, and then uh, where required or where appropriate, we also make investment decisions at pre-series and Series A. Uh, Antel is based out of India and Singapore. We are headquartered in Hyderabad, India, and we have presence in Mumbai, where I'm based, in Delhi and Bangalore. Thanks.
Awesome, Devang. Thanks a lot for that intro. And Gianpaolo, would you like to go next? Gianpaolo? I think his screen is frozen. Gianpaolo, are you there? So how about I give my intro and we can have Gianpaolo's intro down the line, right? So hello everyone, my name is Harsh Shetya. I'm a Gianpaolo's back. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Harsh. Thank you for having me here. This is Gianpaolo Parigi. I'm a venture capitalist and investment banker, partner of two private equity groups in California and in London, and chairman of a single family office in New York. So very nice to be here today, and back to you, Harsh.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Gianpaolo, for that introduction. And so now an introduction about myself. I'm Harsh Shetya. I'm a venture partner with our Ventures. We help early stage startups raise funds right from 200 to 50K all the way up to $10 million. And I've also created a group called Startup Hackers, where I'm consulting and mentoring early stage startups to reach a certain stage till they become investable by VCs like Devang and Gianpaolo here. So that is essentially what I'm typically operating. So coming back to our topic for today, right? Why some great ideas fail to fundraise. So let's talk about one step before that, something much more fundamental, right? What do you essentially look at when you want to invest in a startup, right? Do you look at ideas? Do you look at concept? Do you look at business? What are some of the major parameters you look at when you look at investing in a startup? Devang, would you like to start first?
Sure, I can go. I think the stage where we invest pre-series A and Series A. Sometimes it's largely the team. It's usually the one thing that will stay constant over the next 5, 7, 8 years. The rest, there's bound to be pivots and there's bound to be changes in the market and all that. So the team is critically important. Everything from what they've done in the past, their entrepreneurial flair. The team should be well rounded. So one technical and one business person at least. We don't like that person to be the same person. We like one business head, one technical head, and how they know each other. Ideally, they should have known each other for a few years prior to starting the company. So it's not like someone's just brought them together to build a company. Those things usually don't stand tough times, those situations. We also don't like hired situations. So we don't like a CEO that's hired CIO or a CTO that's hired a head of marketing. We like, for them to be founders of the company. Of course, then the rest is all needed. You need a sizable market. You need an idea which is distinct and has some differentiation. We don't like incremental ideas like most other VCs. We like something that's game changing, that disrupts an industry or upends it, brings about changes which are significant, not incremental. And the addressable market should be big. And then if any of the founders or the key team members have past experience in growing a company and exiting, that's always helpful.
Got Got it. Makes sense. Very insightful and very important points over there. A lot of startups sometimes they feel that just we get an idea and something, and we can go out to the VC and raise funds, right? It is far more complex and far more complicated than that. So you illustrated a lot of those important points. Thank you, Devang, for that. And Gianpaolo, could you share your take on that?
Well, I would say to begin with that ideas cannot be funded. Projects seldom are funded. What could be funded is actually what we call referred to as deals. So, how to transmit the motion from the engine to the wheels of the vehicle is part of the founder's challenge. How to transform the idea, which is the initial sparkle, into a project which keeps the engine revving and running, and last but not least, and ultimately how to transmit the energy to the wheels so that the vehicle can move. It's very important to define these three different layers, because too many entrepreneurs are really stuck in the realm of ideas. Some of them venture out to manufacture a project, but very few of them are capable of putting together what we consider a viable deal. And a viable deal has to do not only with the fact that there must be an idea of a return or a possibility of achieving returns down the line, but there are more components that are necessary for this vehicle to be functional, and this is something that we can discuss today.
Correct. That's a great point there, Gianpaolo, isn't it? Ideas by themselves, they are very half baked, right? Just on idea, you cannot kind of invest. You need something more behind it. How you kind of brought the idea to the fruition, what the steps you have undertaken. A lot of those other factors are required to kind of to make it something which is much more investable. So could you kind of deep down into that a little bit further? What kind of elements that you look at, and why do you feel some great ideas today? Especially during COVID situation, we all are aware that early stage fundraising has become a little difficult, right? So why don't you tell us, what you are essentially, firstly elaborate on that point, and what other some ideas which you think could have gotten fundraised according to you?
Harsh, you broke up. I'm sorry. Could you repeat? If you were addressing me, I beg your pardon. But can you repeat the question, because you broke up? There was a miscarriage in communication.
Okay, no worries. So my original question was kind of building on the original point which you made, right? Ideas cannot be funded. You need to bring the idea to the wheel, right? If you could delve on that further, and additionally, what some other good ideas which you thought could have been funded, but did not get funded in your own personal experience.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit difficult to make recollections of all the things that we have seen might have worked and didn't, and because there are really many different factors. Time to market plays a role for sure. You may have brilliant ideas and even turn them into projects way too early for the market to receive the input. And so, I mean, you would have overshot the runway unbeknownst to you. So this is one example why ideas, may fail. But I think in general, the greatest single issue that we keep seeing is the lack of execution, really the lack of proper execution on every item. This is, creating adventures is like playing on the keyboard. I mean, you got to respect every single key, the white and the black keys, and every key has a function. You can't miss one key when you're playing. Otherwise, you would go out of tune, and the music that you're playing will be affected. If you keep missing too many, or you go out of tempo, definitely you're going to have a cacophony, not a symphony. So the reality is, I think execution really plays a role, and it's the most overlooked aspect. But I also see that now Vandana finally joined us, so I would like to leave her some space to introduce herself and tell us something about what we're discussing here today.
Sure. Thank you so much for adding me back. I'll just should I
Exactly.
start by
So
introducing
finally,
myself?
due to some technical delay, Vandana could not join us earlier, but she's here now. So Vandana, if you could, hello,
Should I introduce myself first?
yeah,
Should I introduce myself first, or should I jump onto the question?
yeah, just a quick intro, and then what you look at in startups in terms of fundraising.
Okay. Okay, sure. So, first of all, thank you for the entire team of Latokan VCTV, and thank you, Harsh, for today's episode. I had
Yes,
my
please,
own
just do a
family.
quick intro first, and then you can then elaborate.
Yeah, sure.
Am I not audible?
So, you're audible.
Is there a
Am
technical
I
issue? Am I not
audible?
audible?
You're audible. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. So I had my own family office in Singapore and Jakarta. I worked as an investment banker and advisor to family offices and angel investors in Jakarta, Indonesia, helping startups from a diverse background from fintech and B2B tech all the way to consumer startups. I was raising funds for them and providing them with a range of services, just as Convanto does today. And after 15 years of staying in Singapore and Jakarta, I came back to India. I did investments for a bit and then returned to advisory. That is when Convanto was founded, and today Convanto is the most well-known boutique investment banks in India, led by a female founder. I'm connected with 300 plus investors globally. We pick up global deals. We are sector agnostic, and we typically do $1 million to $25 million. Now, coming to the question as to what I look into startups when we pick up deals is, we definitely look at the founder's background. We also look at what are they bringing on the table in terms of any kind of disruptive technology, and if there is any revenue in the company. Typically, we look at more of tech sectors like fintech, edutech, edtech, health tech, deep tech, robotics, IoT, AI, and ML as well. And also, coming to the topic slightly here, that why startups fail is the first and foremost thing is the pitch deck. I feel that pitch deck should be done in a professional manner, made by a professional, because I think that is what is the first thing that goes out to the investors. So if that is only not in order and it is not made by a professional, not done, keeping the slides and the timings in mind, it calls for a backfall for the startup. Sorry. Not only that, startups do put in a higher valuation and box themselves up, when they reach out to investors. So I think that is another reason also why some of the startups fail. Of course, there are many other reasons. We had two founders. They used the money of the investors in buying a car and treating cancer. So even that is not acceptable. So these are some of the basic factors that lead for a startup to fail. So, oh, Harsh is not on the call.
We might have lost him. Some problems in the communications today, apparently.
I see.
Well, why don't we carry on and listen? I'll take it from here one moment until Harsh comes back. What do you think? Again, I mentioned before a lack of execution as what I keep seeing as the greatest single issue. But overall, from a strategic point of view, I mean, what's your experience for both of you? What do you find really the bone of contention? What do you find the critical areas when you are, ready to invest in a company and you stop short of investing? I mean, what really makes you untick, if it will? And I would like to start with you, Vandana, again, and then our courteous fellow host as well, guest as
Could
well.
you repeat your question, Gianpaolo?
I said, Vandana, what makes you stop short of committing an investment when you see something that doesn't work? I mean, in a startup. I mean, if you can remember any, important case in which you really stopped short and did not commit on an investment that you had otherwise been ready to commit. As I mentioned, my example is being having verified that the founders were lacking of the execution skills and capabilities that they had maybe thought that they had or they are purported to have. So I want to see what's in your vision and in your experience the points that would be deal breakers before you commit onto an investment, and as I say, on top of the lack of execution that I've mentioned.
Yeah, very good question. There was one particular case of a fintech company wherein we got him 3 term sheets, and investments were about to happen. Way beforehand, we had given him the DD list as to, he had to prepare certain documents. When his DD happened, there was a certain point which he had to correct it, which he didn't, because of which his funding round failed. And this entire process took us actually 6 months because the pandemic had also hit us, and with great efforts we got him these term sheets and we explained him that he needs to fix the DD, but because he didn't do it, the entire round failed. So it's also because of these factors. In another case, the fund took very long to hit the accounts of the founder, wherein the funding round failed. So these are some of the factors also why a funding round fails. And DD, of course, we can only look at the DD when it's actually happening with the fund. Before that, nobody can actually say what goes wrong where.
Thank you. And Devang, what about you? What have you seen as a deal breaker, maybe a few minutes prior to closing on a deal in a startup? You're on mute. You're on mute, Devang.
Yes, I must say we haven't yet come across a scenario where we had to change at the 11th hour. We've generally, the DD has come through fine. I think if at all what we see in a pre-series A, the most important thing is the team. And to go further, I think pre-series A investors, what they decide pretty soon actually is more of a gut feel. Like when you meet a team that is seed funded, that is this company Series A able? That in 18 months, will this company be at Series A for us to invest at pre-Series A? So what does that mean? Either they have a great tech, something patentable, great defensive moat, and enough execution capabilities to take it a point where a tech-focused Series A investor will come in, or they have an idea which can change economics, the dynamics of one industry, and a superb execution team, great growth hackers. Or it's some elite team of some university coming out of an incubator at a premier university, which is a new cure for cancer, or things like that. So, cybersecurity is some very hot market, very big market, great need, where even I wouldn't say above average, but a good team will benefit from the rising tide, which lifts all the boats. That's 2-3 of these scenarios where right time, right place, great team, great execution. At least 3 or 4 of these, 3 of the 4 boxes get ticked, and you decide that okay, this company will go to Series A. So we invest in pre-Series A. Once they go to Series A, then good execution takes them to Series B. At which point, many pre-A investors and seed investors often exit at a sizable Series B or decide to stay on. So at pre-A, you want to make sure the company is Series A able and on route to Series B. Right. So, and then what goes into it is, like I said, just the fundamentals of team, market, all the stuff that is always discussed, and then there's this X factor that, the team has it in them to hit that growth trajectory.
Thank you, everyone. Arsh, back to you.
Thanks, Gianpaolo, for taking the lead and taking the initiative for the hosting. So I had another question over here, slightly different from the topic which you are discussing over here. But there are some early stage accelerators. I think Devang had mentioned this point where you prefer the founders who have a few years of relationship between them. So the classic case would be Farm Easy, right? Those guys have been from their childhood. They know each other, grew up together, and created this beautiful company today. There are certain incubators and accelerators today, like Antler and a few others, right? Where essentially you go in as a founder without a company, you work with other co-founders over there, merge 2 or 3 of them together and create a company. So I would like to understand your thought on that. What do you think?
I mean, if it works, it's great. There's no harm in that. But it's some kind of a forced matchmaking session, right? I think if it clicks, a startup can be born. It might just be very successful. It can become a unicorn. But the true test lies when things don't go well. When a funding round gets delayed, or a sizable business deal does not happen, or gets delayed, or the market turns against you, regulatory changes happen. When any adverse event happens, then the affinity within the founders comes to test, right? When in happy scenarios, it's fine. In adverse scenarios, these things will come to the fore, and then the relationship will get tested, because it's human nature, right? You get distracted by projects outside. You're saying there's nothing in it for me, or the startup will not hit its stride. Something will happen. The competitor will eat you up. And then how the core team stands together to weather such storms is the true test of the affinity of the founding team. So human nature is that if you know someone from, let's say, college or some prior job for 5-7 years, the friendship, the relationship is such that it can stand through some adverse scenarios. So that's just my take on it.
Got it. Interesting. Gianpaolo, I wanted to check with you. Understand the European ecosystem, right? There are a lot of international collaboration the team in Europe is doing to try to expand their startup ecosystems. Right? Obviously, you have great ones in the US like the Silicon Valley. You have in New York. You have in Texas, Dallas, and a few other countries of the world. Right? What is Europe kind of doing at this point of time to support those early stage startup ideas so that they reach at a certain level where they become investable by other VCs?
Yeah, well, great question. Thank you, Arsh. And by the way, I also agree with what our dear colleague, the one has said right now, because there is affinity, and affinity among founders and investors is always important. If it doesn't click, everything gets much harder. But of course, after the affinity, then you have to have, again, the capability to execute, and especially the capability to play well a bad hand. And like in poker, everybody's capable of playing a good hand. But, the reality, sometimes the business, the economy deals you a very bad hand, and how well that particular team plays together in that moment is what really matters and gets you through the night. Now, coming to your question, Europe is doing, by Europe, we want to define first and foremost, the European Union is doing a great job, I think, finally, putting substantial funds together for startups, and particularly for startups on 4 different technology sectors that are blockchain and artificial intelligence, healthcare, environment, and everything that is connected to tackling the climate change, and in general software and applications that are regarding the digital transformation. So there's about 2 trillion that have been earmarked in the European Union as of last year in August, of which about 1 trillion would be disbursed beginning this year. So there's enough momentum already with this, not to mention every other amount of private and institutional capital and strategic capital that is available already in the continent. So I think to put it in the perspective, I think that we are going to definitely see those 4 blocks: India, China, European Union, and United States. basically being the four main actors in the technology space when it comes to startups. And everybody else will have to reorientate, and hope to be attracted in one of these four big magnets, and because outside of these four magnets is really very little in terms of capital for startups. But of course, there are many promising potential young entrepreneurs and founders that would be left unattended if we do not cater to them. So how to try and blend whatever good we're doing in those four very large continental blocks and the rest of the world, I think, is one of the challenges that we are facing. And whoever can bridge this gap, I think, is welcome in the industry, because, of course, entrepreneurs have to evolve. They also have to come of age in a way. They have to understand where the wind is blowing, and the reality cannot be changed. Of course, if we are in some countries in Africa, it's very unlikely that we will have a capital hub or main financial center there anytime soon. And in the meantime, companies that are being formed in Africa, there are phenomenal young companies that are coming out. They have to think, where to reach for capital as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of flexibility that it's called upon. In this era, it's not just about, okay, I'm good as a founder, I have a good mousetrap or a better mousetrap, and I have even IPR. I need also to combine that, with efficiency and with the flexibility to understand where my consumer or business market really is. So my destination, and I have to combine and couple these, last but not least, also with where can I search and obtain the capital that I need for the growth of my venture. Because obviously, if I spend too long raising capital, my venture may be obsolete. Especially technology makes everything obsolete pretty quickly nowadays. So the barriers of entry are much lower than in the past, but by the same token also, the competition is much fiercer and faster than ever before. So I think, in this respect, Europe is presenting definitely as one of the markets to be in, because you could find the capital, because you could find the consumer and the business to business market, and because you can find the talent, and because you can find the industrial and manufacturing support that you need in any venture when it comes to actual physical manufacturing. Thank you. Harsh, I think you're on mute.
My bad. A lot of interesting points over there, right from kind of ecosystem support, which is there, to the internal competition. And the biggest element, biggest takeaway over here is in today's day and age, with tech being so easily available, tech is no longer the moat, right? Coming back to Devang's original point, what is the defensible moat? Tech by itself is no longer the moat. That is why you need to find out something which is more defensible, something apart just from tech, something truly mind-boggling, different, or you come up with that deep insight from the sector, which comes after decades of working in the industry. Something along those lines could probably come up as a moat for you, and probably that is, that becomes a much more defensible proposition, right? So coming next to Vandana, Vandana, you've been helping a lot of companies and startups raise funds for the past few years, right? I want to, get your take on how startup fundraising has been, different from, say, 3-4 years back to the last 6 to 12 months during COVID.
So, it's a very good question, because a lot of funding has happened in the past 2 years. Of course, in the edutech sector, it has happened a lot, much more than any other sector. But, we have seen, last year I have closed 4 deals just by sitting on one chair in fintech, in agri-tech, in edutech, in food tech. So, health tech deals are also happening everywhere. And I've seen that there's enough capital, enough deals are happening. It's just that in between those 2 months, everything has slowed down, but still, investments were happening. And I think the whole thing has gone into a digital platform. whether it's conducting meetings, whether it's, closing deals, whether it's having these kind of webinars, everybody has gone digital. So the efficiency has increased. For instance, I could only do 3 to 4 meetings in a day. Now I can do 10 to 15 meetings in a day and close a lot many things. So I think that is what has changed from now and then. And I think the mindset of the investors has really matured. In your last talk, you had also mentioned about Zomato, if you remember, that Zomato being loss-making went on to the IPO stage. So I think everywhere the mindset is changing a lot. Everybody wants to do something unconventional and, break those barriers and make things happen now. So I think that's what is going on.
Got it. Some very interesting points over there, particularly about going digital and everything. How to be more comfortable speaking on webinars and everything. So, Devan, I wanted to come to you for the next question, right? In India, in particular, if you check, this year has been absolutely phenomenal in terms of, the number of unicorns we've seen grow, the Zomato IPO, which happened last week, which turned out to be, incredibly successful, right? So we are seeing a lot of these big ticket deals happening, $20 million, $50 million, $100 million. A lot of these big deals are happening. What is your take, on the earlier side of the deals, right? For smaller ticket sizes like $500,000, are you seeing any sort of deals over there? And what do you think founders need to do at the earlier stage, to make them more palatable to the VCs and the investors?
Yeah, I think we are seeing a lot more of the early stage deals also, because everyone is getting enthused by the whole exit scenario, right? What is being called now in India the new age IPO, which basically describes Paytm, Policy Bazaar, Zomato, Swiggy, maybe Nykaa. The story is getting complete now. Flipkart was the first inflection point. It was proven that an Indian startup can get acquired by a US startup for multi-billion dollars. The first one happened in India. It never happened before. So now the startup story is that you can start a company in India, you can get angel funded, you can get VC funded, you can get Series B, and you can get exit. In the whole story from start, soup to nuts, as they say, has been defined now. Now even IPOs are becoming more prevalent. So there's enough evidence now that in India, the investing public, both retail and institutional, is mature enough to look at growth factors apart from profitability. They're happy to look at growth metrics like unit economics and things like that. So I think now there's be a lot more early stage deals, because those will be enthused by the fact that there's many more exit avenues. I think Harsh has left again. I think there's some ongoing. Anyway, so yeah, I think to the point of early stage deal making. Yeah, Harsh, you're back. So I was just saying that there's likely to be a lot more early stage deals, a lot more angel deals, because everyone is going to be enthused by the fact that there's a lot more Series A, B, C, D. There's a lot more PE plays. There's a lot more IPOs. There's more exit avenues, and everybody understands the startup ecosystem much better. So you're not restricted to like a Nasdaq listing or a pivot to Singapore to make money. I mean, no, that's not the case anymore.
Correct. A lot of interesting points over there, and particularly I'm seeing a lot of growth in the new VC funds which are being established as well. Just yesterday I saw a tomorrow.fund being started by Girish Matrubhutam, right? And apart from that, there have been three other funds which have started just in the last month, all focusing on tech sectors and consumer goods and those kind of sectors, right? So a lot of interest, especially in the consumer retail segment. I'm seeing a lot of interest happening over there. So a lot of progress is happening in that sector. So Jampal, I wanted to understand from your side, right? Do you see any specific sectors which are extremely bullish in the European market or the US market, which you come across, where it's becoming extremely easy, where if startups come up with something very innovative, they're getting funded more easily? Are you seeing some sector preferences or anything of that sort over there?
Yeah, well, at the cost of repeating myself, I would say that the four drivers of growth that the European Union government has identified are definitely the 4 most promising sectors for startups. Everything that is technology connected to the software and the digital transformation and the removal of the old legacy systems from the 20th century would be welcome in companies of every size and shape. Second, the environment. Europe is already a world leader in the environmental consciousness and in the respect to the environment. But of course, there's still a lot more to be done and completed. So we need new technology, we need new investments, we need new infrastructure, constantly keeping up with the way our climate evolves in order to maintain the quality of lives that we are used to have for those who have them and for those who do not enjoy those qualities yet, to make sure that they can also enjoy. I'm talking about potable water. I'm talking about the quality of food, not only sustainable food, but quality of food, and the quality in the urban landscape, in the city infrastructure, mobility, transportation. There's so many items that are really hot in Europe, but they would be just as hot anywhere in the world. And then, again, healthcare, because we are all, confined in our own countries, more or less. We can travel, but, with a lot of limitations and aggravation. But we should not forget that the world remains global and the technology business remains global. And again, coming back to why ideas fail, I think one of the other important aspects to consider in those failures is the fact that the founders underestimated the value of going global soon. They have to go, companies and startups have to go global as quickly as possible and have to reach for foreign markets, have to reach for those challenges and measure up to those challenges, have to create a diversified, culturally diversified teams with different backgrounds. Companies that are just hoping to enjoy, the pleasure of working at home in those, even in those large economies, are inevitably doomed to be extinct soon and to fail, because the market is global, and this is a good trend that is not going to be stopped, not even by COVID. And as I say, there are hiccups in the system, but the markets are global and remain global, and companies that are not posed for being global, have no place.
Got it. Very interesting points over there. So, especially in the technology companies in today's day and age, when globalization has become so easy, it's extremely important to look at becoming global within 2 to 3 years horizon. It's absolutely vital, especially for SaaS and technology startups. So now, Vandana, I wanted to come to you next for the next question. I wanted to understand. So, obviously, equity funding is one of the most popular routes of funding for startups at the earlier stages, right? And it takes a lot of time to make those relationships with the investors, make those relationships with the VCs. It takes on an average 4 to 6 months, depending on how you have the relationship done, right? So apart from equity funding, do you suggest any alternative forms of funding which the startups could use at the earlier stages, which could kind of help them navigate the initial days?
Yes, they can definitely go for debt funding. They can go for strategic tie-ups. They can go for M&Es if they feel that they are unable to sustain. There are many other ways. They can go for some private lending options. There are many options. They can go for a CCD. So it doesn't really have to be equity, but Convanto only focuses on equity investments, but there are many other options like debt, private lending, and other options which they can go for. The fastest is debt and getting quick money from the banks, NBFCs, etc., which they can get it in 21 days.
Got it. Devang, would you add something to this?
Yeah, I mean that you spoke about funds coming up. So there's going to be specialized funds. India, I think, has at least 5 debt funds now in the VC ecosystem, and they're doing pretty well. I'm not a big fan of debt, to be candid. I think equity is the way to go for an early stage company. You have to share risk and reward. Debt, what it does, as classical corporate finance, it imposes fixed costs on variable revenue. Right, so startup revenue is variable, but costs become fixed. So the startup, by definition, becomes riskier because you have to make a fixed set of outgoing payments every month or every quarter. But your revenue can be very lumpy, right? Because it's startup. So that's why I think investments in a startup, at least till Series B, should be equity only, where someone takes a reasonable stake and then shares both the upside and the downside. That's the best way to reflect it. But I think in India, what's been happening is that debt rounds have been happening in conjunction with VC rounds. So I think the philosophy is that there's enough money in the bank to service the debt, and the revenue is not that lumpy or variable. So that I think these scenarios arise from the fact that founders don't want to dilute beyond a certain point. I think and it's true. I mean, if the founder equity falls into single-digit percentages, they lose interest. They start getting distracted by other things because the upside is mediocre. When you own just 7-8% of your own company, right? You get diluted at each round at 20-25%, and you start losing interest. Debt is one way to curtail that. So you still maintain a healthy double-digit percentage of the company, each founder. And you have some outgoing payments every quarter, but it's still manageable. So I think it just depends. If the people cannot agree on valuation, or if valuation is pretty small and the company is relatively small at Series B, but a significant amount of Series B is required, then the only mathematical way to solve it is to have a mix of debt and equity.
And you've been bang on this, right? We've seen a lot of these venture debt kind of deals right from Series A stage itself, right?
Yes.
To $5 million equity, $5 million debt.
Yeah, I mean, at Series A, I think venture debt should come in at Series B or later, right? At Series, it depends. Again, the definition of Series A varies, but in India, I think 3 to 5 mil is considered Series A today. If part of that is debt, I think it's troublesome. I think if you're talking about a proper Series B, 8-10 mil, of which a couple of million is debt, that's more palatable, I think. It just varies. There could be scenarios where even startups could have more defined revenue. In which case, debt can be more appropriate.
True, makes sense. And definitely, in the point regarding founders' equity, right? Founders want to retain much of the equity. So a lot of times, even the predictable revenue which they are sure that they can repay, they look into that. Also, in some cases, if they want to purchase some sort of asset, right, going through the asset-based financing route makes more sense rather than probably you diluting equity and using that to purchase assets. So that is also sometimes makes more sense probably rather than doing equity dilution at that point of time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've not invested in any asset-heavy industry because ours is all tech startups, where basically the biggest cost is the team and engineers. But yeah, I guess in asset-heavy industries, this starts looking like project financing. It's not classical startup VC dynamics what you're talking about. But yeah, if you want to finance projects through debt and all, and asset purchases and all that, and depreciate those assets over time and finance it through debt, yeah, I guess there's some for venture debt there.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Devang, for that. Jump on the same question. I'd like to understand from you what is more prevalent in European markets.
Well, I think and the traditional tenets that Vandana has mentioned still apply, but we see a new flexibility brought in by some fundamental macroeconomic reason. The first is debt is becoming very cheap as a result of quantitative easing and interest rates being extremely low. There are more alternative lenders than they used to be around even only 6-7 years ago. And at the end of the day, if a venture is viable for debt as well as for equity. I think the key point is how patient is the capital that you are getting on board, because even debt, if patient enough, could be a good capital, because the interest rates are so low. So if you are given ample time to accommodate the whole process of starting up, pre-Series A's and through Series A's and further, even debt could be, a viable and important component in the early stage of the ventures, where only a few years ago we would have thought of this as inadmissible, inapplicable, unrealistic. So I think we need to be prepared to morph as the economy morphs and as the businesses morph. So I think it's just, always keep an eye open for what's going on, and keep ear to the ground, and move accordingly and decide accordingly.
Absolutely, very crucial point. So it's very important for the startup to be very flexible and be agile in terms of identifying the right sources of funding, right? Equity source of funding is always there, but if they get an opportunity, to manage and because that will help them retain a lot of valuable equity as well. So, just to take some final comments from everyone, on this specific topic right now, what essentially is, the most important thing which you kind of feel, that apart, we've already discussed the team, we've discussed the founding concept, the execution, right? Apart from these 3-4 major factors, what additional thing which you require to kind of ensure that, you can get a great fundraising round done and to build a successful startup? And your closing thoughts on the same, and your details, how people can reach out to you, how people can communicate to you. We can start with Vandana.
So the thing is, I repeatedly say in all my talks, very important part is the pitch deck, then comes the video pitch deck, then comes your financial models and valuations, the story that you create to pitch to the investors. Team has to be complementary, a marketing team, a technology expert, an operations team. There has to be drive in the founders. The technology needs to be disruptive. And, what founders do is that some of the founders need to have the drive to run their show, not completely depend on investments also. If it's not happening, then maybe they should try to bootstrap, not having a website in order, not keeping their LinkedIn in order. All these factors, call for a backfall of a startup. Hence, it is very important to hire the right kind of investment banker who has good relationships with the investors, can guide you as to how you should do your pitch decks and etc., and how you should actually reach out to the right investors. Because many founders, they are not checking the website of the investors, they are not checking the thesis of the investors, and they are just doing cold calling. That is again causing a backfall also to these startups. And also keeping a positive mind, reading the book, The Power of the Subconscious Mind, and having your mind in center is very important when you're doing this startup journey, because it's all about ups and downs. So that is very, very important. And I could be reached out on my LinkedIn handle or my website, www.convanto.com. And thank you, Harsh and Giampaolo, for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Vandana, for that nice summary done. Devang, what would you like to add apart from the points which you already mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think it's the golden era for startups in India. For all the, in addition to all the things that we discussed, right, about VCs and startups and incubators and all that, I think there's a lot of interest in India from all quarters, because it's being viewed as the investment destination of choice in Asia, right? All the critical elements that go into a great ecosystem, the same critical elements that went into the Silicon Valley or Singapore or innovation centers in UK, for example, are in place in India today and are ready to take off. In addition, the macroeconomics of the country are fantastic. Stock market is very buoyant. So it's a great time to start a company. It's a great time to raise, if you have a startup, to raise money Make sure your first principles are in place. Founding team, idea, don't do anything incremental, do something game-changing. Build a good pitch deck, as Vandana keeps mentioning. Don't put in a slide, I keep saying, with 300 words that talks about your whole life, and that adds nothing really. So crisp. Gary, who's on the show often, has a wonderful way of saying 10 slides, 12 minutes, and there's one other parameter he uses I don't remember, but it's perfect. 10 slides, maybe another 5 or 10 in the appendix. 12-minute pitch should communicate your whole idea and your go-to-market. If you don't have that, then I think you are not convinced yourself about what's going to work and not work. Network a lot. It's very important to be networked in the ecosystem, right from alumni to people you work with, to people you studied with, to people who are neighbors, uncles, aunts. You always need all the help you need to raise funding. And then, institutional investors, of course, will follow once you have all the elements in place. I can be reached on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Devang Mehta. There's a few Devang Mehtas, but Devang Mehta and Antil, there's just one. So please reach out to me. Happy to help. Happy to look at your plan, and look forward to the next discussion. Thanks for anchoring this, Harsh.
Thank you so much, Devang, for that amazing points. And definitely, a lot of startups need to, be listening very eagerly to the points which were discussed by Vandana, Devang. So I would like to kind of add to that point, right? The 2 10s which you added, right? I call it the 3 10s. Number first 10 is the founders, then is 10 minutes pitch deck and 10 minutes presentation, and 10 slides for the pitch deck and 10 minutes for the presentation. That is how I like to call it the 3 10s with the startups which I work with. So Gianpaolo, anything which you would like to add to to share with the startups?
Sure, absolutely. I would say, founders have to really concentrate and cherry pick among the different businesses that they can pursue. They should pursue businesses that are potentially scalable and potentially patentable, because IPR is the name of the game in technology, and the scalability is the name of the game in everything, in every business in the world. I'm Gianpaolo Parigi. Thank you for having me here today at Latok and BCTV. Thank you, Harsh, and thank you, our fellow panelists. And you can reach me on LinkedIn.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for an amazing session today, guys.
Thank you, Harsh. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Devang. Thanks,
Bye,
Gianpaolo.
guys.
Thanks.